Today we're starting out doing some organic stuff. So I'm going to show you some new warm-ups to help with that. Is doing some curves or some ribbons. Then across that way, we can do them sort of bending around us this way. I do want to have lines that are roughly parallel to each other as I do this. I'm trying to have a curve that for the most part is a straight little ribbon here. Right now there's no arcs or anything to it. Right, so practicing curves here before I actually sketch that. Connecting this tangent right there. And so there is that curve. I can continue with at least one more on the page here. So let's have one coming under here like this. Try and squeeze as many on the page as possible. Just get the most practice on this page as I can. Draw that last straight line after I do the curves. Because if I mess up just a little bit, it'll be nice for the line to match the pen mark instead of the marker mark. All right. So there are just some curves for warm-ups. Little things we can also do to these curves. I can start to practice my straight lines inside of them. I try to do like a little gradient on the underside here. Slowly spread those apart. We can do a gradient even maybe on this side right here. And so now I'm practicing some straight lines there. Slowly spread them apart from each other. Like that. Also come back with a thicker pen. Try and clean this line up just a little bit. I do slow down as I sketch those second lines there. Even do straight line right here. More comfortable to draw it at this angle. So that gives you the opportunity to practice your line thicknesses by going over lines you've previously sketched with some thicker lines. So let's try warming up right now initially with some ribbons, and then I'll show you a few other sort of warm-ups we can do in getting ready for organic things like trees and plants and whatnot. All right, so that has been that long, but hopefully you've been able to do like at least 2 or 3 of these. So the next warm-up we can do in preparation for drawing some organic things like trees is some cylinders, but multiple types of cylinders. We can just do a regular cylinder. Start with my minor axis and sketch my ellipses for that, right, and connect them. I can also, though, start to say like a curved cylinder or a bent cylinder, a tube or a noodle, depending how you want to call it, all will work. Maybe you want to even do a section somewhere here in the middle to help me along the way with my curve. And another thing I can do here is a tapering cylinder. So I can do a cylinder here. Let's just make that go right here. All right, so it'll be tapering, so it'll be narrower at the top and wider at the bottom. And connect them. And I can also draw a section in the middle there. And one last little thing I can do here, oh, a couple others, so not the last one yet. I'm going to do kind of a snaking tube there. So that a little smaller. Rotate, so you're trying to sketch your ellipse perpendicular to the point where you end up putting it down on paper there. And connecting all those points. And so we're doing more complex sort of little warm-ups here, such as compound lines and connecting them. And one last little thing we can do here is even like a split cylinder there. So I'll start off with two center lines. And as it starts to split, draw both of those sections there. And then this one out here and out here, and connect them. But here, right, that they would be connected like that. So let's start with this last one. Right here, where these two sections meet, you get something that looks kind of like that. Right, you see me rotating the page a lot. It's always the most comfortable way to draw any of those ellipses. And then back to the rest of these. Important, right, that I pick the correct section so that this is consistent across the form there. You can break up your curves into smaller curves so that they are smooth on that surface. It's worth taking your time to try and do them accurately as possible so that you get a feel for what is right, and also the confidence that you can do what is right when you are trying to do what is right. And again, we can practice, say, by going over some of these with a thicker line, like this one down here. And you do see me slow down compared to how I first sketched the line. but I still want to move with a certain amount of speed so my line doesn't get too wobbly on the page so the ink doesn't bleed out too fast. Other things we can start to do is even going back to some of these ribbons here, put a little pencil on the top surface there to practice that. We can practice putting marker on the page as well. Maybe a little bit of a 3 right there. Back to the 1. Practice marker, say on any of these cylinders here. So if this one here is tapering, it should be right, a little narrower at the top than is at the bottom. And lastly, the 5 in here. So the first practice is just sketching some of these forms and shapes themselves. But the second practice is that you can start to practice using some of the tools like the pencil and the marker and thicker line weights to continually improve on those. So if there's something that I've been critiquing you on that you're having trouble with, such as maybe some of your curves and the smoothness of your curves, then you might want to focus on practicing with that. If you've been having trouble applying markers, then once you have some forms on the page, practice applying some marker to them so you can improve with that. Again, mostly for today, I'd like us to be doing like trees and bushes, not flowers at this point in time. And so with those trees and bushes, let's use a number 3 at first. So it's just a little bit easier to see on the screen here. So I have this manzanita plant up here in the bush, up here in the corner. And what I want to do when I first sketch that is I want to simplify a lot. So when I look at that reference right there, what do I see? I see this sphere right here. I see another one right here, and another one right here. And I see like something like this, and like this. There's a lot more going on in the reference than what I've sketched here. But I want to oversimplify it at first. Let's put that in pen. I'm going to use a number 5. What I will do, instead of just a line like I sketched with a marker, I am mostly looking at this thing almost as if it was 2D. Have just a little bit indication of the ground right there. But that's my oversimplification. The reason being, by doing it this way, in our reference, it looks like light is just coming directly from the top. So I can look at this thing. Well, I'm going to keep this one right here 2D, like it's just flat. But this one right here, we can look at it and say, well, if the light's coming from the top, there's probably a core shadow right here, because that's where the core shadow would be on a sphere. And then it would have a gradient down below that with light coming from the top. Right. And then on top, and then if there was a shadow, we can't really see it in this reference, but if there was a shadow coming down from that, right, it would come down to the ground, and would have something of a shadow like this right here on the ground. So it allows me to look at this thing very simply. And what is the sort of overall form that is happening there? So I'm going to do another sketch of this. And in that second sketch, looking at the same reference, I'm going to start off just like I did before. So there's this sphere sort of right here, this bunch of leaves. There's another bunch over here. It's actually probably larger, I think, than I sketched the first time. This one here is actually, I think there's another one right here that's a little smaller. And there's this big one right here. And then there's kind of one going off screen somewhere over here. Now, we do have this trunk right here, but then it kind of comes up and splits into two, maybe three major ones. There's this one right here that comes up and splits, and then splits again, and splits again, and even like that, and like that. So now as I do this again here, my first one I was trying to keep it kind of 2D mostly, flat. But now as I look at this next one, I can start to think about what direction are some of these sort of trunks going, right? So where might the contour lines bend? Does it bend toward me or away from me? Most trees will get narrower as they go up. So if I accidentally draw a line, the lines sort of separating from each other, I then just split them into multiple branches, even if there was not that in the original one, because it makes a better looking sketch. There are a few trees out there that do get wider as they go up, but it is few rather than many. And so I'm doing some editing here, right? I cannot see the bottom of my reference because there's some other branches and stuff in the way. And that's okay to do some editing and take some things out. So let's put, this one is kind of in the front right here. This one is in the front of this one, and this one is in the back over here, which puts this one over here. Actually, I think this one right here is kind of in front of that one. We have this and this, right? So there's my second sketch, right? Getting a little more detailed into the big sections that are going on here, in the big forms, right? I'm taking this big bunch up here and compressing it all into like one big form instead of looking at individual leaves. The next thing I'm going to do is go and look at some individual leaves. So let's go find some. We got this right here. It's kind of close up. I'll see if we can find something a little farther away. %. Let's zoom in on that a little bit. Nah, that's not too detailed. Let's keep going. This is nice. Yeah, let's use this one. So I see the leaves up there. And what do I see when I see those leaves, right? I see these little stalks, right, coming out. And then from them, leaves coming out of there. So let's sketch that. Let's just move this over so it's not blocking what I'm sketching. And I want to do that. Right. I see again like a branch, and then even right here I see a branch coming out, and I see like another one right here and here and here and here, and then I see the leaves. Looks like at the end of this one where I have like two little leaves, and then right some bigger leaves. And as far as I can tell, it looks like the leaves are kind of alternating, right? They don't come out of the same spot. It's like one goes to the left, then one goes to the right. So then we have this other branch over here, similar. Notice where they meet up. And we saw some leaves right there. And same thing. Again, kind of at the end, we have two, but then they kind of alternate from there. And same pattern again. Right. So I did not try and draw, exactly what I was looking at. I was searching for the pattern. The pattern was, right, the leaves seem to do something kind of like this, and also that the leaf shape is this sort of almond eye shape to them generally. So let's go ahead and put some pen on that. I'm kind of alternating a bit here between deciding what is in the front and what is in the back. And we could finish that up. I want to leave just some of the loose marker work there to show what that looks like. Now I take that knowledge, right, what the individual leaf, well, both the leaf sort of looks like individually, like this sort of almond shape, but then also what it looks like together in terms of how they just kind of randomly come together. By doing all the individual ones, I'm starting to get a feeling for the pattern that is there. So now I want to go back to my other reference. And try sketching this thing again. That said, when I sketch it again, I definitely want to do it larger so that I can get just a bit more detail on the page. So back to our number 3 marker. I'm pretty happy with the proportion of this sketch up here, so I'm going to try and duplicate that, but larger. So there's that main one right there. Here's this other one behind it. Here's this one in front of it. Here's this one behind it. And yeah, we'll have this one here too. That's kind of coming off this side right there. I think my height is a little off. This one's a little taller up here than it is down here. That's the limit now because of where I've sketched these. That's just the limitation I've run up against. So again, it's not going to be exactly to what we're looking at in front of us, but it is still good reference. So we have that there, and then that splits up right there. All right, so draw those sections just like I did in warming up. Make this actually get a little wider right there. And this one comes out to this one. One of the things you want to be careful of is maybe tightening up too much, right? I was very loose when I first started this up here at the top. So I don't want to get, again, trying to be too precise with this and stiffen up and make my sketch kind of, well, less dynamic, less energetic on the page, right? So don't worry about copying, 100% exactly what you're looking at in front of you. Keep it loose, keep it fresh. All right. So now, using my knowledge of lighting up here, right, that generally this thing overall is kind of a spherical shape. Where it is darker, I'm going to add more texture, and that texture I'm going to add is my leaves. So we're going to switch over to pen here. Start putting in, right, these kind of almond-shaped leaves. Both looking at my reference, where are there bunches of leaves? And you don't see me putting them everywhere. I'm not looking at my reference, again, 100%, trying to copy it. And then you see me also getting a little looser, right, at the top area right here. Because when light hits something, we see less detail. Again, where there's shadow, we can see a little bit more detail, but when there's complete shadow, we don't see any detail. Because where there's shadow, it is darker. It allows you to put more ink down on the page, so that texture starts to represent both the lighting of this as well as the texture of the leaves themselves. So that's this little bunch in the front, like this kind of middle one, like right up above this area right here. So now this one over here is in front of this one back here, so we'll also do that one first. Again, I want to keep my leaves roughly the same size, right, because they're not going to change how wide they are when they're that close together. Okay, and as I keep kind of going around here, you see me getting a little looser. We're just doing these lines. But when I do those lines, I don't want to do any line that is like too large in terms of in comparison to the size of like the little leaf forms here, right? Because if I make a really big form like this on here, that's going to feel inappropriate in terms of the size that the leaves are on this bush or a little tree here. So again, more in the shadow side, and again, it's very similar to right how the lighting is up here if it's coming from the top, right? Darker on the bottom, lighter on the top, with a little lean to the right of the page of where the light is coming from. So now I can continue with more leaves here. Again, but a lot looser on this back one. Right, much less detail there. I just implied, where do I get this sort of patterning and shape? I'm looking at the edge of this one and what that looks like and trying to duplicate that over there. And now pretty much the same thing all over everywhere else. But again, because it's like repeating the same thing over and over, I don't spend as much time doing all the same amount of texture on everything, because once you see it here, you start to see it everywhere else. So as I keep going, I get looser and looser to save myself time. If it needs to be, I can always come back and add a bit more textures to some of these, but I might be able to get away with not adding anything to a few of these. So next thing I want to do here, right, is we see some of the shadowing on our reference. So I can just start to hatch, but I like to do it in little patches because that adds a sort of a richness rather than just one big shade piece right there of how the leaves themselves kind of go into different sets of bunches. And this you just need doing it straight up and down, starting initially mostly right underneath the leaves, because again, right underneath them is highly likely that they would be causing a shadow on itself, but you can't see things right below them. Right. That you can't see right below them. And so we can continue with this. This is kind of a nice opportunity right here to separate this one away from the sort of sphere in front of it. Again, in little patches, helps to create a little texture, a little depth. And again, right here. And again, right here. Whereas this one, I might be just a little more general with it. Back to the idea of implied texture, but it's still going for a little bit of that lighting form. Now, you see me just doing the line straight up and down. You could, if you want to, kind of do some variations to just try to follow the form a little bit, but I don't want to mess with that too much for this tree. I think there might be other trees that might be more appropriate to have a little more variation. So for the most part, I'm just going straight up and down. I can add even more hatching in there and maybe add some leaves right above that. Again, not as detailed as some of the other ones I was doing, but again, it's just start to imply that texture in there. So now what I want to do, we can see, right, maybe some of the branches in here. Okay, so that's a branch inside of there. And I can start to pull some of these branches down in here. Again, if we get really close to some of these branches, we might see them be a little more wobbly, but at first, when I sketch them, I err on them being much smoother than I do at getting extreme amounts of detail. I'm oversimplifying forms rather than trying to get super detailed in them. As you keep looking at it, you can slowly add more and more as you keep sketching with various sketches you do. You can add more and more, but initially, make it easy on yourself, over simplify. Right, by putting these lines on the paper, it allows you to sort of evaluate, am I interpreting this thing correctly? And if you make a mistake in interpreting it, well, hopefully at least you have a nice looking sketch, and then you can work on the next one being a little bit more accurate. So what else can we do with this? Here, we can add, we can definitely see some shadows right on these on these higher branches up here. So to start hatching those, to put them in shadow, like my reference, you know, right about here is where the shadow seems to fall on them. You can add just a bit more of the smaller twigs in there, and also try and come back and add a few more of those in here. No need to add too many more in there at this point, I think, for that. Do you want to drop this in shadow? And it's too small for me to really get a lot of form in there, so I'm not worrying about it. Right here, I might get a little bit of core shadow. So I'll show the form of that right there. So a few last things we can do. Where's my pen cap? Pen cap. Number 5, so I've been using a 3. We can come back with a thicker line weight. Get to pull the ones that are forward closer to us, make them pop a bit more with a higher contrast, stand out amongst the sketches behind them. So just a little bit with that. Same thing here, especially on the shadow side, on the darker side here. Even in the layers here, we can do a little bit of that. Some of the branches, help them pop out as well. Rotate the page so I can do my lines as smooth as possible. A few other things, come back even, right, that is the leaves are not all bunched up right there at the top, right? There might be a few down here, so I can add just a few around here and it'll just feel like we have some smaller twigs there sticking out. Maybe even something back there just a little bit. And lastly, come back with a little pencil, right? Little strokes, trying to have these be, oh, break my pencil, but have some of these be very similar in size to the leaves. I can't do it exactly. That's gonna be really difficult. So I'm not trying to be exact, but I can still just do small marks of light kind of hitting the top surface like it's hitting leaves. And my light's coming from the upper right over here, so I'm trying to keep sort of focus the light over in that area first. Again, small strokes, holding my pencil on its side rather than just straight up at first. Again, to try and get those somewhat, again, leaf-sized strokes in there. If I grab my sharpener, sharpen my pencil, I can also, oh, that didn't work. Sharpen my pencil. I can even sketch a few leaves in there. Well, no, I can't because this thing keeps breaking. But we can sketch a few leaf outlines in there. That can also, similar, like the opposite of what we did in the shadow side, let's just get a little bit of, again, texture in there of those leaves. Yeah. And maybe even just a little bit where the sun is starting to hit these, right? Because right where the shadow stops, it means there is some light hitting it. So I can put that on the branches here. That is an appropriate place. But do try and focus it, so don't do it on every single branch. So I'm gonna keep it in the center right here, not on the outer ones over there. And that is how I do a tree, or a, well, tree slash bush type of thing, right? Search for the big pattern. Keep it really simple at first. Go find like the sort of smaller sort of volumes inside that tree, right? Take, you know, if there's a big clump of leaves, bunch them up into like a sphere or an oval shape. Go and search for, you know, what the individual leaves look, well, what an individual leaf look like, but also what a group of leaves look like. Use that to inform how you add texture, right, to these bigger volumes. I very much want to see you do these distinct steps when you're sketching today. That said, I will say I do not always do these as individual steps. Eventually, with practice, you'll get to the point where you also don't need to do them as distinct steps. Here is something of an example of that, right? I started this one in side view. For this bonsai tree, you can see some of the marks in there of me, the marker marks in there of me doing like this sort of oval shape for these bigger sections. You can see some of the contour lines across the stump of this tree here, the trunk of this little bonsai tree here. I then rotated it into 3D from the side view, still like some contour lines. We start to see, right, adding some of the texture of the leaves, right? I sketched the leaf, an individual leaf on the side, just so it helped me define what that shape is. What else did I do there? And then I went to this much larger sketch here. And on the much larger sketch, you can see very similar to what I just did right now. Right, I went in and added some light, mostly focusing the light coming from the top right of the photo here. In this instance, it was well, actually, I forget if this was the direction the light was coming from. So, but I focused my light from the top right here, less detail over here, more shadow on the underside, lots of shadow right here. It was great to allow me to do the texture of the tree here. So that was a conscious choice. Hey, that if I sketch it from this side, I can sketch all this texture. It'll be in the darker area, and it's kind of it now satisfies two things: a little bit of lighting, a little bit of texture, adds a lot of depth to the image there. I want to emphasize how important it is to do these initial sketches here. It's very often, even after I do a lecture like this, that I'll look at their page and they just go straight to this, to a big sketch, the whole tree. Don't do that. Start with a small sketch, oversimplify the tree, right? There are many ways to oversimplify it. You can do lots of editing to this, because if you, right, in this first one, right, I didn't draw like this little thing right here. And you know what? We could have continued to not do it because there's so many on there, right? It's going to take so long to put all that detail in every single little section of the tree that edit it out if that's what you need to do to maybe make a nice layout on your page. Feel free to edit. Use your reference as reference of like what it looks like, not as reference of exactly what you're drawing on the page. All right. If there are no questions, again, wait, I have all these images here in the Google Drive. So please start with those first. So you're all doing manzanita trees right now in class to save you time from doing research. For homework, it's 5 pages of trees and bushes. Again, let's not do like little things like flowers or house plants. We're sticking to this like trees and bushes because we want to focus on this idea of like kind of searching for the patterns and oversimplifying them at first. Okay, so a number of examples again of what the leaves look like individually from different angles. When this thing is more of a bush than a tree. When it's a much bigger tree than it is a bush. So lots of examples here. Your choice is of what you want to do, but you definitely should start again with a larger sort of form first. But even though it's a larger form, be sure you're doing a smaller sketch at first. And then like with my page right here, I have some space, right? Or maybe I do want to do the flower detail right here. So that could be something I do right here, is do a close-up from, what is this here? Do a close-up, well, of that. I could do a close-up of the bark. The bark on this tree is very red and rich. And again, we could do a close-up of some of here. I have the berries. Somewhere over here, I have the flowers. Those are all things I might like do in this section. Or I could just do a whole nother page, right? Do some close-up